Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found pictures from my parents on the dark web. Okay, so I never thought I'd be posting on here, but I need to get this off my chest. I've been on the dark web a few times, mostly out of curiosity. I know it's a bad idea, but I can't help it. Something about the unknown just draws me in. I always used Tor, had a decent VPN, and made sure my antivirus was up to date. I thought I was being careful. Now, I realize how naive I was. This all started about a month ago. I was browsing through some forums looking for anything interesting. I've seen a lot of weird stuff on there, but nothing ever really fazed me until I stumbled upon this one thread. The title was Unseen Historical Albums. It sounded fascinating. Old photos that had never been published, some dating back to the 15th century. The OP, original poster, claimed they had pictures from Columbus's voyages. Being a bit of a history nerd, I was hooked. The post had a link to a zip file. Yeah, I know, dumb move. But my curiosity got the better of me. I downloaded it, despite my antivirus throwing a fit. Once it was on my laptop, I extracted the files and started going through them. At first, it was just what I expected. Old, grainy black and white photos of ships, crew members, and strange landscapes that looked like they could be from Columbus's time. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a color photo, out of place among the old ones. It showed a young couple holding a chest of gold, their faces partially hidden by large hats, but I recognized them immediately. They were my parents. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It didn't make any sense. The photo looked modern, but it was mixed in with images that were supposed to be centuries old. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, or some kind of digital manipulation. But the more I looked at it, the more certain I became. It was them. I started to panic. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this was possible. I scrolled through the rest of the files, hoping to find some explanation. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. There were more modern photos, all mixed in with the historical ones. Each picture showed my parents looking exactly the same in different time periods. They were in the background of significant events, never aging, always holding that same chest of gold. I felt like I was going to be sick. I found a journal entry written in a language I couldn't understand, but it had a detailed drawing of my parents and the chest. The annotations and symbols looked like something out of a horror movie about ancient curses and immortality. I couldn't keep this to myself. I printed the photos and journal entries, determined to confront my parents. I had to know the truth. The next evening, I confronted them at dinner. I threw the photos on the table and demanded an explanation. The reaction I got was nothing short of chilling. My dad's face went pale, and my mom gasped, her eyes wide with fear. The room fell silent, the tension so thick I could feel it pressing down on me. My dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have seen these," he said. There was an ominous edge to his words that made my skin crawl. My mom reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Why are you in these photos?" "We didn't want you to find out like this," my mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" My dad sighed. a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "We're survivors," he said. "We were part of Columbus's crew. We got caught in a terrible storm and ended up discovering an ancient secret, something that granted us immortality. We were chosen to guard it, to keep it safe. That's why we've been hiding in plain sight for centuries." It sounded insane, like the plot of a bad movie, but the evidence was right there, staring back at me from the photos. "And you never thought to tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm your son. I had a right to know." My mom sobbed quietly, but my dad's expression hardened. "We were trying to protect you," he said. "But now, you've put us all in danger." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. Everything I knew about my parents, my life, felt like a lie. I had no idea what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same again. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying that night over and over in my head. I couldn't wrap my mind around the idea that my parents had been alive for centuries, guardians of some ancient secret. It was like my entire life had been turned upside down. Every memory, every family photo suddenly had a dark, unfathomable twist. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I tried to act normal around them, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at my parents, all I could see were the faces from those photos, spanning centuries, untouched by time. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The way they avoided talking about their past, the lack of old family photos, how they always seemed to know things they shouldn't. One night, I decided I needed to know more. I waited until they were asleep and snuck into their room. I rifled through their things, looking for anything that could give me more answers. That's when I found a hidden compartment in my dad's closet. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. My heart pounded as I opened it and began to read. The journal was filled with entries dating back to the 15th century. Each page detailed their journey with Columbus, the storm that had nearly killed them, and the discovery of an ancient temple filled with gold and strange artifacts. There were sketches of symbols and rituals, all centered around the chest of gold. The journal talked about a pact they'd made, a curse and a blessing that granted them eternal life in exchange for guarding the secret. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just some crazy story. It was real. My parents were immortal, bound by some ancient curse. And now, because I knew their secret, my life was in danger. As I read, I found an entry that chilled me to the bone. It was written shortly after my birth. My parents were discussing how to raise me, knowing that one day I might discover the truth. They debated whether to tell me or keep it hidden, fearing what might happen if I found out. The last few entries were more recent, talking about the growing threat of modern technology and how it could expose them. I couldn't read anymore. I shoved the journal back into its hiding spot and ran to my room, my mind racing. I felt trapped, like I was living with strangers. Worse, I realized that if they found out I'd read the journal, they might do something drastic to protect their secret. The next day, I decided to confront them again. I needed to hear the truth from their own mouths. At dinner, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I found your journal," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My parents froze, their eyes wide with shock. "What journal?" my dad asked, trying to play dumb. "The one in your closet," I said. "The one that talks about Columbus, the temple, the curse, everything." For a moment, they just stared at me, their faces pale. Then my dad sighed. "We didn't want you to find out this way," he said. "You keep saying that," I snapped, "but it doesn't change the fact that you lied to me my entire life. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" My mom reached out, her eyes pleading. "We were trying to protect you," she said. "We wanted you to have a normal life." "A normal life?" I laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? I don't even know who you are anymore." "We're still your parents," my dad said firmly. "And everything we've done, we did for you. But now you've put us all in danger," my mom added, her voice trembling. "If anyone finds out about us, it could be catastrophic." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. "There are people who would do anything to get their hands on the secret we're guarding," my dad explained. "If they find out you know, they'll come after you. They'll use you to get to us." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We need to leave," my mom said. "We need to disappear. Go somewhere they can't find us." Panic set in. They wanted to uproot our lives, all because of a secret I never asked to know. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not running away. I'm not leaving my life behind." "You don't have a choice," my dad said, his voice stern. "It's the only way to keep you safe." Safe. The word felt hollow. How could I feel safe knowing my parents were centuries-old guardians of an ancient curse? Knowing they'd lied to me my entire life? I felt like my world was crumbling around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The tension in the house was unbearable after our last conversation. My parents had become strangers to me, their comforting presence replaced by an ominous aura that made my skin crawl. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was consumed by the revelation of their immortality and the dark secret they were guarding. But I wasn't ready to give up my life and run away. I needed more answers, more clarity about the extent of their deception and the true nature of the threat we were facing. One evening, I overheard them talking in hushed tones in their bedroom. I crept closer to their door, pressing my ear against the wood to catch their conversation. "We need to act fast," my father said, his voice a tense whisper. "He's a liability now." "He's our son," my mother replied, her voice cracking. "We can't just—" "We don't have a choice," my father interrupted, his tone final. "If he talks, we're all dead." My heart pounded in my chest. They were discussing me. The realization hit me like a freight train. My own parents were considering killing me to protect their secret. I had to get out of there. I went back to my room, my mind racing. I quickly packed a bag with some essentials, clothes, my laptop, some cash, and waited until they were asleep. Around midnight, I quietly slipped out of the house, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I had no plan, no destination in mind. I just knew I had to get as far away from them as possible. For days, I was on the run, constantly looking over my shoulder. I moved from motel to motel, never staying in one place for more than a night. I tried to think about my next move, but it was hard to concentrate with the constant fear gnawing at me. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was hiding some unseen threat. I tried reaching out to friends, but I couldn't risk explaining the full story. I just told them I had some family issues and needed to lay low for a while. They offered help, but I couldn't drag anyone else into this nightmare. One night, while holed up in a dingy motel on the outskirts of a small town, I decided to log onto the dark web again. I thought maybe I could find some information or someone who could help me understand what was happening. I posted anonymously on several forums, describing my situation in vague terms, hoping for some guidance. The responses were varied. Some people called me crazy. Others offered useless advice. But one message stood out. It was from a user named Watcher, who claimed to know about the curse and the ancient secret my parents were guarding. They said they could help me, but I needed to be careful. My parents were more dangerous than I realized. I arranged to meet Watcher in a public place, a small cafe on the other side of town. I didn't trust them, but I was desperate for answers. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, and I spotted a man in his late 40s sitting alone in a corner booth. He looked ordinary enough, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made me uneasy. "You must be the one with the cursed parents," he said as I approached. I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I need to know what's going on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Watcher leaned in, lowering his voice. "Your parents are part of an ancient order, chosen to guard a powerful secret, one that many would kill to possess. They've been doing this for centuries, and they've made enemies along the way." "What kind of secret?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "The chest of gold you saw in the photos," Watcher explained. "It's not just treasure. It's tied to a dark ritual that grants immortality, but it comes at a cost. The Guardians are bound to protect it for eternity, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep it hidden." I felt a chill run down my spine. They said I put us all in danger. What did they mean? Watcher's expression grew serious. "By discovering their secret, you've become a threat. Others will come for you, hoping to use you to get to them. Your parents know this. They're trying to protect you, but they're also protecting themselves." I felt a wave of nausea. "They're planning to kill me," I whispered. Watcher nodded grimly. "They won't let anything jeopardize their mission, not even their own son." Desperation set in. "What do I do?" "Keep moving," Watcher advised. "Stay hidden. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't go back to them." I left the cafe feeling more lost and scared than ever. I knew I couldn't run forever, but I had no idea how to stop them. My parents were relentless, and their centuries of experience made them nearly unstoppable. I was no match for them. That night, as I lay in another dingy motel room, I heard a noise outside my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed the gun I had bought for protection, my hands shaking. The door burst open, and there they were, my parents, their faces cold and determined. "You don't have to do this," I pleaded, pointing the gun at them. My father took a step forward. "We don't have a choice," he said. In a moment of panic, I pulled the trigger. The gunshots echoed in the small room, and my parents fell to the floor. I stood there, shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But as I watched, something impossible happened. They started to move, to heal, their wounds closing right before my eyes. They stood up, their expressions unchanged. "You can't kill us," my father said, his voice calm and eerie. "We are immortal." I realized then that I was trapped. There was no escaping them. They would never stop, never age, never die, and they would never let me go. In the end, I was cornered, their cold hands closing around me, their eyes devoid of the love I once knew. They were going to kill me, to keep their secret safe for eternity, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. My heart raced as I tried to process what just happened. I had shot my own parents, and they got back up as if nothing had happened. The reality of their immortality was sinking in, and it terrified me. They moved closer, their faces devoid of any humanity I once saw in them. I needed to escape, but I was trapped in a tiny motel room with nowhere to go. Thinking quickly, I grabbed a lamp and swung it at my father's head. It shattered on impact, but he barely flinched. My mother lunged at me, but I dodged her, making a break for the door. I ran out into the night, my lungs burning as I sprinted down the deserted street. I could hear their footsteps behind me, relentless and unyielding. I ducked into an alley, trying to lose them in the maze of narrow pathways. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. How do you escape from people who can't die? I needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere they couldn't find me. I eventually stumbled upon an abandoned warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and I slipped inside, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The place was dark and filled with debris, but it offered some semblance of safety. I found a corner to hide in, trying to calm my racing heart. Hours passed, and I could hear them searching outside, calling my name. Their voices were calm, almost soothing, but I knew better. They were trying to lure me out. I stayed hidden, hoping they would give up and leave. Finally, the noises faded, and silence settled over the warehouse. I didn't dare move, too afraid they might still be out there, waiting for me to make a sound. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of my parents and their unending pursuit. When I woke, it was morning, and the sunlight was streaming through the broken windows. I cautiously made my way out of the warehouse, my body aching from the night spent on the cold, hard floor. I needed to figure out my next move, but my options were limited. I decided to head to the library, hoping to find some information that could help me. I remembered the journal I had found in my father's closet, the sketches of symbols and rituals. Maybe there was something in there that could give me a clue about how to stop them. At the library, I spent hours researching ancient curses and immortality. Most of it was useless, just myths and legends that offered no real answers. But then I found a reference to a ritual that sounded eerily similar to what my parents had described in the journal. It talked about a binding spell that granted immortality, but tied the souls of the guardians to a specific object, in this case, the chest of gold. The text suggested that destroying the object could break the spell, but it was risky. If the spell was broken improperly, it could have catastrophic consequences for the guardians and anyone connected to them. I wasn't sure if I could trust this information, but it was the only lead I had. I needed to find the chest of gold. If I could destroy it, maybe I could end this nightmare. But I had no idea where my parents were keeping it. I decided to head back to my parents' house, hoping to find some clues. Sneaking back into my childhood home felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, tainted by the dark secrets I now knew. I went straight to my parents' bedroom and started searching for anything that could lead me to the chest. In the closet, I found a hidden compartment, much like the one where I'd found the journal. Inside was a map, old and worn, with markings that seemed to indicate the location of the chest. My heart pounded with excitement and fear. This could be it, my chance to end this once and for all. I left the house and made my way to the location marked on the map. It led me to an old abandoned church on the outskirts of the town. The place was decrepit and eerie, the perfect hiding spot for something so valuable and dangerous. I entered the church, the wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. The air was thick with dust and decay. I followed the map to the basement, where I found a hidden door behind an old altar. My hand shook as I pushed it open, revealing a small room with a single chest in the center. The chest was exactly as it had been in the photos, ornate, ancient, and ominous. I approached it cautiously, my heart racing. I knew this was my chance to end it, but I was also terrified of what might happen. I took a deep breath and raised the crowbar I had brought with me, ready to smash the chest, but before I could bring it down, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see my parents standing in the doorway, their faces expressionless. "You don't have to do this," my mother said softly, her eyes pleading. "You have no idea what you're messing with," my father added, his voice stern. "I don't care," I shouted, desperation in my voice. "I can't keep living like this." I brought the crowbar down with all my strength, shattering the chest. A blinding light filled the room, and I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. My parents screamed, a sound of pure agony, and I watched as their bodies convulsed, the spell breaking. But as the light faded, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. My parents lay on the floor, their bodies lifeless, but the curse had not released me. Instead, I felt a dark force wrap around me, pulling me into its grasp. In my final moments, I understood the true nature of the curse. It wasn't just about immortality. It was a binding force that required a guardian. By destroying the chest, I had taken their place. Now, I was bound to protect the secret for eternity, trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain and horror. If anyone reads this, know that my parents are not the only ones guarding this dark secret. The curse is real, and it will stop at nothing to protect itself. Stay away from the chest, and for the love of God, don't make the same mistake I did. Finish with part 5. Make sure you. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold stone floor of the abandoned church basement. My body felt heavy, weighed down by an invisible force. The chest was gone, reduced to splinters and dust, but the room still pulsed with a dark energy. I struggled to stand, my limbs aching, my mind foggy. My parents' bodies were gone. I staggered to my feet, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The reality of what I had done hit me like a sledgehammer. I had destroyed the chest, hoping to end the curse, but instead, I had unleashed something far worse. I felt a connection to the church, to the dark secret it held. I wasn't free. I was bound to it. I stumbled out of the church, the world outside feeling surreal and distant. I needed help, but who could I turn to? The people I once trusted were either dead or would never believe me. I decided to reach out to Watcher again. He seemed to know more about this curse than anyone else. I found an internet cafe and logged onto the dark web, my fingers trembling as I typed out a desperate message to Watcher. I told him everything about destroying the chest, my parents' deaths, and the new burden I felt weighing me down. I hit send and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, a reply came through. Watcher's message was short but clear. "You've made a grave mistake. Meet me where we first met." I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Watcher could help me fix this. I made my way to the cafe where we first met, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Watcher was already there, his expression grim. "You shouldn't have destroyed the chest," he said without preamble. "The curse is ancient and powerful. It needs a guardian to bind it. By breaking the chest, you've become the new guardian." "There has to be a way to break it," I pleaded. "I can't live like this." Watcher shook his head. the only way to break the curse is to pass it on to someone else. But that means condemning another person to this fate. It's a cycle that's been going on for centuries. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I couldn't condemn someone else to this nightmare, but I also couldn't live with this burden. Is there no other way? I asked, my voice trembling. Watcher's eyes softened slightly. There might be a way to contain the curse, to keep it from spreading, but it's risky, and it might not work. You'll need to find a place of power, somewhere the curse can be sealed away. He gave me a list of possible locations, ancient sites with strong mystical energy. The nearest one was an old cemetery on the outskirts of town, known for its eerie reputation and supposed haunted history. It was a long shot, but it was my only hope. I thanked Watcher and headed to the cemetery, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. The place was desolate, overgrown with weeds and filled with crumbling tombstones. As I walked through the gates, a sense of dread washed over me. This was it, my last chance to end this nightmare. I found the oldest part of the cemetery, where the graves were so old the names were worn away by time. I started digging, using my hands and an old rusted shovel I found nearby. Hours passed, my body aching and covered in dirt, but I finally unearthed a large, ancient stone slab. Following Watcher's instructions, I placed my hands on the slab and began to chant the incantation he had given me. The air around me grew cold, and the ground seemed to tremble. A dark energy swirled around me, threatening to consume me, but I held on, repeating the incantation over and over. Suddenly, the energy surged, and I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. I screamed, but I didn't stop chanting. The pain intensified, and I felt like I was being torn apart. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, there was a blinding flash of light, and the energy vanished. I found a dark website that broadcasts live exorcisms. Alright, so let me start by saying that I'm not some hardcore thrill seeker or anything. I mean, I enjoy the occasional horror movie or creepy story, but I've always kept a safe distance from anything too extreme. But something happened recently that I just can't shake off, and I need to share it, if only to get it off my chest. So, about a month ago, I was hanging out with a buddy of mine, Jake. We were just chilling, having a few beers, and talking about random stuff. Jake's always been into the dark web, and he's got this knack for finding the most messed up stuff online. He starts telling me about this site he found that streams live exorcisms. At first, I thought he was messing with me, but he insisted it was real. Naturally, my curiosity got the better of me. Jake handed me his laptop and pulled up the site. It looked like any other generic streaming site, but with one big difference. The content was pure nightmare fuel. The homepage had a list of live streams with titles like Exorcism of Emily, Day 3 Inches, and the Possession of Father Michael. It was eerie as hell. Against my better judgment, I clicked on one of the streams. The video was grainy, probably shot on a low-quality webcam. It showed a dimly lit room with a bed in the center. On the bed was a girl, maybe in her late teens, strapped down with leather restraints. Her face was gaunt, eyes sunken, and she was thrashing around like a wild animal. There were two men in the room, one dressed like a priest, and the other in casual clothes, probably an assistant. The priest was chanting something in Latin, holding a crucifix and sprinkling holy water on the girl. Her screams were unlike anything I'd ever heard. A mix of rage, pain, and something else I can't even describe. It was like there were multiple voices coming from her, all overlapping and echoing in this horrifying symphony of agony. As the exorcism went on, the girl started convulsing violently. Her back arched in an impossible way, and her eyes rolled back into her head. The priest kept chanting, but his voice was shaking. The assistant looked terrified, like he wanted to run but couldn't. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. The girl stopped thrashing and went eerily still. Her eyes snapped open, and she looked directly at the camera, like she could see me watching. Her lips curled into a sickening smile, and in a deep, guttural voice that didn't belong to her, she said, "I see you." I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He said something about it just being a trick, like they knew people would be watching and wanted to freak them out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that girl's face, heard her voice. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was off. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the sight. Against my better judgment, I found myself going back, watching more streams. Each one was worse than the last. I saw things that no one should ever have to see. People contorting in unnatural ways, voices screaming in languages I couldn't understand, eyes that seemed to look right through the screen and into my soul. The worst part was, the more I watched, the more I felt like something was watching me back. One night, I was watching a stream of a particularly violent exorcism. The subject was a middle-aged man, tied to a chair, his face covered in blood and sweat. The priest was shouting at him, demanding the demon to reveal its name. The man started laughing, a horrible, manic laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, the video cut out, replaced by a message in bold red letters, "You're next." My heart stopped. I tried to close the site, but my computer froze. The message stayed on the screen, taunting me. In a panic, I unplugged my laptop and threw it across the room. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every little sound. I couldn't focus at work, and my friends noticed I was acting weird. I tried to tell Jake about it, but he just brushed it off, saying I was letting it get to me. Then things got worse. I started hearing voices, whispers in the dark, calling my name. Objects in my apartment would move on their own, just small things at first, like my keys or a book. But then, one night, I woke up to find my bed shaking. I could feel a cold presence in the room, something malevolent. I knew I needed help, but who could I turn to? I couldn't exactly go to the police and say I was being haunted by a website. I tried reaching out to Jake again, but he had gone dark. His phone was disconnected, and his apartment was empty. It was like he had vanished. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. The voices are getting louder, and the things I see in the shadows are becoming more real. I feel like I'm losing my mind and I can't escape. If anyone out there knows what I'm talking about, please tell me what to do. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Alright, so here's where things really start to go off the rails. After my last post, I got a lot of messages, some from people telling me to seek professional help, others sharing their own creepy experiences. But there was one message that stood out. It was from a guy named Alex, and he claimed to have had a similar experience. He said he knew what I was going through and offered to meet up to talk about it. I was desperate, so I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in the middle of the day. Alex looked rough, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were trembling as he sipped his coffee. He told me he had found the same site months ago and had been haunted by it ever since. Alex said he'd tried everything, priests, shamans, even a psychic. Nothing worked. The site had a hold on him, and it was driving him mad. He showed me scars on his arms, deep and jagged, from when he tried to cut the evil out. It was horrifying. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Alex said he'd discovered a hidden forum on the site, accessible only if you watched a certain number of streams. On this forum, people shared their own stories, much like what I was going through, but worse. There were detailed accounts of possessions, disappearances, and even deaths. The site, it seemed, wasn't just for entertainment. It was a gateway for something far more sinister. I asked Alex if he could show me how to access the forum. He was hesitant, but eventually he agreed. We went to his place, a dingy apartment that reeked of stale cigarettes and fear. He pulled out his laptop, and within minutes, he was navigating the dark corners of the site, like it was second nature. The forum was everything he had described, and more. The posts were chilling, filled with graphic details and desperate pleas for help. But there was one thread that caught my eye. It was from someone claiming to know how to break free from the site's grip. The post was long and rambling, but it mentioned a ritual involving a specific chant and a list of items. I jotted down the details and thanked Alex, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. But as I was leaving, he grabbed my arm, his eyes wild. "Be careful," he said. "They're always watching." That night, I gathered everything I needed for the ritual: candles, salt, a mirror, and a crucifix. The chant was in Latin, and I had to recite it at midnight, standing in front of the mirror with the candles lit and the salt forming a circle around me. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a bad horror movie, but I was willing to try anything. As the clock struck midnight, I began the chant. The words felt strange on my tongue, heavy and dark. I could feel the temperature drop, and the shadows in the room seemed to move on their own. Halfway through the chant, the lights flickered, and I heard a low growl behind me. I kept going, my voice trembling but steady. Then something slammed into me from behind, knocking me out of the circle. I hit the floor hard, the candle snuffing out in an instant. The room was plunged into darkness, and I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle, dragging me across the floor. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, trying to break free. Suddenly, the grip loosened, and I scrambled to my feet, flipping the light switch. The room was empty, but the mirror was shattered, pieces of glass littering the floor. I was bleeding from a gash on my forehead, and the salt circle was disturbed, the lines broken. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching the crucifix and praying for daylight. When morning finally came, I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister, hoping that distance would weaken whatever hold the site had on me. But the voices followed. No matter where I went, I could hear them, whispering, taunting, promising unimaginable horrors. My sister noticed I was acting weird, but I couldn't tell her the truth. I was afraid she'd think I was crazy, or worse, that whatever was haunting me would go after her too. I spent hours online, searching for answers, reading everything I could find, about demons, exorcisms, and curses, but nothing seemed to match what I was experiencing. I felt like I was slipping further into madness, and I didn't know how to stop it. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A distorted voice spoke on the other end, low and menacing. "You can't escape," it said. "We're always watching." I hung up, my hands shaking. The next day, I decided to confront the site head-on. I went back to the dark web, navigating to the site with a sense of dread. I posted on the forum, begging for help, hoping someone would know a way out. That's when I got a private message from a user named Watcher. They claimed to have once been in my position and offered to help. Desperate, I agreed to meet them in person. We arranged to meet in a secluded park at night. I know, it sounds like a terrible idea, but I was out of options. When I got there, a man stepped out from the shadows. He looked normal enough, but his eyes had a haunted look. Watcher explained that the site was more than just a collection of twisted videos. It was a portal for something ancient and evil, feeding off the fear and suffering of its viewers. He said the only way to break free was to destroy the device I had used to access the site. Without hesitation, I took my laptop, phone, and anything else I had used to watch the streams and smashed them to pieces. Watcher performed a cleansing ritual, chanting in a language I didn't understand. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The voices quieted, and the shadows seemed to recede. I thanked Watcher, but he warned me that the site was always looking for new victims. "Stay away from the dark web," he said, "and never ever go back to that site." I moved back to my apartment, hoping the worst was behind me. But part of me still feels like I'm being watched, like the darkness is waiting just beyond the edge of my vision. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again, but I'm trying to move on with my life. If you're reading this, please take my advice. Stay away from the dark web and never ever seek out that site. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. After I destroyed my devices and had the cleansing ritual performed by Watcher, I really believed that I was free. For a few days, things felt normal again. I went back to work, reconnected with friends, and tried to put the whole nightmare behind me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The darkness had taken root in my life, and it wasn't going to let go that easily. The first sign that things were far from normal came about a week after the ritual. I was lying in bed, finally starting to drift off, when I heard a faint scratching noise. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a mouse, but the sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and started searching the apartment. The noise seemed to follow me, always just out of reach. I checked every corner, every closet, but found nothing. Exhausted, I finally gave up and went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, things got worse. I started receiving emails from unknown senders, filled with disturbing images and cryptic messages. The images were of the exorcisms I had watched, but they were different, darker, more twisted. The faces of the possessed were distorted, their eyes black and soulless. The messages were even more unsettling, filled with threats and warnings. One email stood out. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line sent chills down my spine. "We see you." The body of the email was a single sentence. You can't escape what you've invited in. Attached was a video file. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The video was grainy, but I could make out a figure in a dark room. As the camera zoomed in, I realized with horror that it was me, sitting at my computer, watching one of the Exorcism streams. The timestamp on the video was from the night before. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in my apartment, recording me without my knowledge. Panicked, I called the police. They came and checked the place, but found no signs of forced entry. They said it was probably just a prank, some kind of sick joke, but I knew better. The darkness had found a way back into my life, and it was getting bolder. I tried to reach out to Alex, but his phone was still disconnected. I went back to his apartment, but there was no sign of him. It was like he had vanished off the face of the earth. Desperate, I tried to contact Watcher again, but his profile had been deleted. I was on my own. That night, I had the most vivid nightmare I've ever experienced. I was back in that dimly lit room, watching an exorcism. The girl in the bed was thrashing violently, her screams piercing the air. The priest was chanting, his voice steady but strained. Suddenly the girl's eyes snapped open, and she looked directly at me. "You can't run," she hissed, her voice a horrible mix of male and female tones. "We're always with you." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The room was dark, but I could feel a presence, something malevolent lurking in the shadows. I turned on every light in the apartment, but it did little to calm my nerves. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. The next day, I started researching everything I could about demons, exorcisms, and curses. I visited libraries, consulted old texts, and even reached out to a few online communities that dealt with the paranormal, but nothing seemed to match what I was experiencing. It was like I was dealing with something that defied explanation. Then, I received another email. This one was different. It was from Alex. The message was brief, just an address and a time. "Come alone," it said. "I have answers." I knew it was a risk, but I had no other options. That night, I drove to the address Alex had given me. It was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked like it had been deserted for years, covered in graffiti and overgrown with weeds. I parked my car and approached the entrance, my heart racing. As I stepped inside, I was hit by a wave of cold air. The interior was dark and musty, filled with broken furniture and debris. I called out for Alex, but there was no response. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Alex, but he looked worse than before. Gaunt, pale, and haunted. His eyes were wild, darting around the room as if he expected something to jump out at any moment. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time." He led me deeper into the warehouse, to a small room with a makeshift altar. There were candles, symbols drawn on the floor, and a book that looked centuries old. Alex explained that he had been doing his own research and had found a ritual that might break the curse. "We have to act fast," he said. "They know we're here." We began the ritual, chanting the ancient words and lighting the candles. The air grew thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. As we reached the climax of the ritual, the room grew unbearably cold, and the candles flickered out. Then I felt it, a presence, more powerful and malevolent than anything I had encountered before. It was like the darkness had come alive, wrapping itself around us, suffocating us. Alex screamed, his body convulsing violently. I tried to help him, but it was like he was being torn apart from the inside. The room filled with a deafening roar, and I felt myself being pulled into the void. The last thing I remember was Alex's eyes, wide with terror, and a voice whispering in my ear, "You can't escape." I woke up outside the warehouse, alone and disoriented. My car was gone, and I had no memory of how I got there. The warehouse was silent, empty. There was no sign of Alex or the ritual or anything. I stumbled home, my mind reeling. I knew I had to write this down, to warn others. The darkness is real, and it's still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm not giving up. If you're reading this, please, stay away from the dark web and never, ever seek out that site. I'll continue to fight, to search for a way to end this, but I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The darkness is closing in, and I'm running out of time. I can't believe I'm writing this, but here we are. After everything that's happened, I feel like I'm at the end of my rope. The darkness is relentless, and I'm not sure how much longer I can fight it. But I have to finish this story. You need to know what happened. After waking up outside the warehouse, I knew I needed help. Real help. I reached out to anyone who might understand what I was going through. I contacted paranormal investigators, demonologists, even clergy. Most thought I was crazy or a prankster, but a few took me seriously. One name kept coming up. Father Thomas, an exorcist with a reputation for dealing with extreme cases. I managed to track him down, and after some convincing, he agreed to meet me. We arranged to meet at his church, a small ancient building on the outskirts of the city. Father Thomas was a stern, no-nonsense kind of guy. He listened to my story without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he sighed heavily and told me that what I was dealing with was far beyond a simple haunting. It was a demonic infestation, something that had latched onto my soul through the dark website. He agreed to help me, but warned that the process would be dangerous. The demon, or whatever it was, wouldn't let go easily. We prepared for a full exorcism, gathering everything we needed: holy water, crucifixes, blessed candles, and Bible. Father Thomas also brought along 2 assistants, experienced in dealing with the supernatural. The exorcism was set to take place in the church. As the sun set, I felt a growing sense of dread. The church, normally a place of peace, seemed to hum with an almost tangible tension. Father Thomas began with prayers, sanctifying the space and invoking divine protection. His assistants stood by, their faces grim but determined. As the ritual began, I felt an overwhelming pressure in the room, like the air itself was being squeezed. Father Thomas started chanting in Latin, his voice steady and strong. The temperature dropped, and the candles flickered violently. The presence was back, stronger than ever. Suddenly, I felt a searing pain in my chest, like something was clawing its way out. I fell to the ground, writhing in agony. Father Thomas and his assistants continued to chant, their voices growing louder, more insistent. The pain intensified, and I could hear a cacophony of voices screaming in my head, cursing, threatening, pleading. I don't know how long the exorcism lasted. It felt like hours, days even. At one point, I lost consciousness, only to wake up to the sound of a deafening roar. The air crackled with energy, and I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. But through it all, Father Thomas never wavered. His voice was a beacon of light in the darkness, guiding me back to reality. Finally, with one last desperate scream, the presence was expelled. The room fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted. I lay on the ground, exhausted and shaking, but alive. Father Thomas and his assistants helped me up, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. "It's over," Father Thomas said, his voice hoarse. "You're free." But I wasn't sure. The darkness had left its mark on me, and I could still feel its lingering presence. Father Thomas warned me to stay vigilant, to avoid anything that might reopen the door to the demonic. He blessed my home and gave me a crucifix, telling me to keep it with me at all times. For a while, things were quiet. The voices stopped, and the shadows seemed to retreat. I started to rebuild my life, slowly finding some semblance of normalcy. But the scars remained, both physical and mental. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the darkness was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then a few nights ago, I received another email. This one was different. No threats, no disturbing images, just a single line of text. "We're not done with you." My heart sank. I knew what it meant. The darkness wasn't gone. It was just waiting, biding its time. I've taken every precaution, surrounded myself with protective symbols and holy artifacts, but I know it's only a matter of time before it finds a way back in. I'm writing this now as a final warning. The dark web is a dangerous place, filled with things that defy explanation, things that can reach out and touch your life in ways you can't imagine. If you've read this far, please stay away from that site. Don't make the same mistakes I did. I don't know how much longer I have before the darkness returns, but I'm not giving up. I'll keep fighting, keep searching for a way to end this once and for all. But if I don't make it, if the darkness wins, at least my story will be out there. Maybe it will save someone else from the nightmare I've been living. Stay safe, and remember, some doors are better left unopened